detail. And then where this particular fellow was not the normal place where the person would be at. But as I said, you've gone, you've gone a Valentine, the fellow will give me details today. Yes. I need some information as to what, because the sound, the vibes around the area was different. I know people had fun yesterday.
Of course.
But I hope the fun will not result to what will get result around November.
I hope people hear that the warning of NACA.
Is that what?
I said I hope people heeded the warning of NACA.
Oh, there was a warning from NACA.
Yes, because of the AIDS and all that. But I also said that people should, be wise while they drink from the cup of love. But then,
and
in some months to come,
yes, it's actually November that we'll get to hear results. Just like you've done WAEC, and then the results will come at the right time. But then, aside that, it was also a good time for guys who wanted to run away from responsibility yesterday. Because it was a Valentine celebrated in the middle of no cash. So you had people saying, I had no cash, so I couldn't do much for you.
And it was a tenable excuse.
Oh, well, tenable within the context, and so is interesting. But then the issues before us persist. They refuse to go away. And in fact, if you ask many people, that appears to be getting worse. Unfortunately so, because our leaders have refused to yield. And there's some interesting dynamics to all what is happening today. We'll be feeding you all of that details in the papers this morning. And after the papers, our guest will be joining us from Abuja this morning. He's an economic expert helping us to make an understanding of all of these current cash crises, the cash crunch, the impact on the consumer spending ability of the average Nigerian, the purchasing power of every Nigeria. I mean, so is this going to have any impact on inflation? Because Emefiele at the point said, these withdrawal of cash in circulation is also meant to fight inflation, at least by 4%. Yes. I'm hearing some report from some economists who were saying this is even going to lead to worse economic indices for us. So all of that will be after the papers. But thank you so much for joining us once again. We'll take a short break. Now, when we return, we'll bring you the papers.
Just stay with us.
All right, so thank you so much for joining us again. Let's begin with the Punch newspapers as usual. Naira crisis worsens. Confusion over CBN silence on old notes, legal tender status. POS agents, customers fume as protesters barricade road. Emefiele justifies Naira redesign, accuses politicians of mop-up. That's on page 2 of the Punch newspaper. Talk where it's getting worse. I mean, that's banner headline. The Naira crisis worsens.
Yes. At least before we knew that we could take the old Naira to the banks and it would be accepted. And only that the new notes were not in circulation. But now we don't even know what the status of the old notes are, because we don't know if the banks refuse to collect these notes from the customers, and the new notes are still as scarce as they were even before now. So, but now there's a confusion, and that's where the Naira crisis is worsening. There is a confusion now because the CBN obviously is not saying anything. Is the deadline effective? Is the extension effective? Is it not? Nobody is really telling us what the actual state of things are. So people are really in confusion. People are in a confused state right now. And the fact that Emefiele is justifying the Naira redesign is even disheartening, because it has been said over and over again that it wasn't a well thought out policy at this period. I mean, it's important to redesign the Naira, but the period that it's been done is the problem. And
the manner of implementation, the approach here. I mean, these are some of the problems that people are complaining about. And like you said, it's been silence all the way. Remember that about a week or thereabout ago, the president told the governors who came to meet him to plead on behalf of Nigerians. And I wonder why governors had to go and plead with the president. Is the president, that insensitive that couldn't feel the pains and agony of the ordinary Nigerian? He asked that they give him 7 days with which to fix the problem that time. Now he's well past 10 days. We've not heard anything. I mean, that silence is not golden. That silence, in fact, is insulting to the people. You occupy the office at the behest of the Nigerian people. And so now there is also a Supreme Court order, last week, that the CBN is evidently not complying with. That's disrespecting the highest court in the land. And now banks are not even collecting the old notes again, so making things actually worse. But let's get to see, we see more details on other papers. But down below that banner headline, NYSC wants corpus against crime as orientation ends. Very important message to them there.
Very important.
And bottom of the paper by the right-hand corner, contempt. EFCC kicks as CSO demand Bowers removal. Man is been in the eye of the storm because of these contempt charges a couple of times. I wonder why he's also disrespecting the court. Trapped earthquake victims cry for help. Death now 41,200. This is horrendous.
Very alarming. It's rising by the day and in thousands, not just.
That was a projection I saw that said the deaths could rise to as much as 60,000.
And it said that trapped earthquake victims are still crying for help. So there are still people trapped.
Oh my goodness. I wonder if it's still possible to get people out alive now. Because how many hours after? How many years? Over a week. Oh my goodness. Just beside that, Lagos pastor backs live jail for impregnating 2 sisters. Oh my goodness. 2 sisters. Lagos pastor. I mean, so if you check this is a pastor and then 2 sisters. Oh my goodness. Okay. Just beside the nameplate, expulsion. Inamani sues PDP. Okay, Inamani sues PDP. IU restates backing Tinubu. I mean, how do you do this?
Yes.
You belong to a different political party. You're supporting a different political presidential candidate.
Yes.
I don't want the party to hit you with sanctions. How do you justify that?
Then he has to sue now, suing the PDP and IU.
Yeah,
let's see
because
what
he's been expelled. He's been expelled already. And I'm also trying to, I hope I get someone to explain to him the legal implications on Inamani. I mean, this expulsion. What's the implication on Inamani? If you're expelled from the party and your candidate is running for election?
Because it's still running for office.
Yes. Does that affect you in any way? Does that, in any way? I think we need to get to know. So above the nameplate, resist interim government temptation. Afeni Ferry tells Buhari, rumors, unconfirmed rumors, swirling around about
an interim government.
Yes, this is all about to get interim. That will not work. Call it work, as our people say here. Revenue Commission to review politician salary. Oh my goodness!
When we had that retired editor in the house, I think 2 days ago.
Okay.
I wanted to ask him, but time was against us, if we should start dreaming or reviving the economy by reviewing all of this public officers' salaries and benefits, including the severance packages, because I think it's one aspect to look into. It would go a long way.
It is really.
And giving back to our economy as it is. So this review now, we don't know if it's to up it or downwards. Yes,
so do not celebrate yet. But like you said, I agree with you totally that we need to review. We need to slash the pay, because it's also even responsible for the dangerous and vile and very deadly kind of politics that we're playing.
Yes.
Because, people take loans. It beats me, how, because you want to serve the people, you incur debts running into millions of naira.
Because, somehow you get it back.
Because, when you get it, you get it back. So if the pay of our politicians is commensurate with what the ordinary civil servants say, make the pay what the permanent secretary. So only those who are interested in serving the people will come forward to want to run. But it's because that, and there are monies that you cannot even track. So for state governors, there's something that is called the security vote. That's actually unaudited, and people, it's a lot of money every month that the governor spends as he deems fit. May not necessarily spend it on security alone. So all of these, I do hope, we do pray that the review is going to be downwards. But I doubt that no Nigerian politicians cut their own salary. You need some forces from heaven to come and do that for us. Yeah, you know.
And we are hoping that the incoming government will be the force that you just talked about.
Yeah, let's see if they'll be bold enough to do that. I mean, you won't be surprised if you hear them say, "Oh, we need to review the salaries upwards because of inflation, because of the current realities." And then you ask, are those realities
just
for
sections
politicians
to that
alone?
part? Exactly.
What about pensioners? You know,
Pensioners are not even being paid,
oh my goodness.
let alone
What about
reviewing
civil
the
servants? You know, so all of this. So the last headline and the Punch newspaper this morning: U-turn, INEC to keep sensitive election materials with CBN.
You know, sometime on the show, I was saying that every institution in Nigeria is Nigerian and should be particular about happenings in Nigeria too. I would ask you now, if you say that the CBN shouldn't have concerned itself with the election and, you know, probably helping out in a way, why then should INEC, you know, be planning on keeping the sensitive election materials with the CBN?
Okay, so you know why this is news. Not traditionally, I should say, INEC has always kept the sensitive materials with the CBN. It's from the CBN that the materials are distributed 24 hours to election, and all political parties are present and their agencies, security agencies, and that's because CBN facilities are presumed to be secured.
Yes.
They're heavily guarded facilities, and that's where we keep our notes. But the issue about keeping materials at CBN or not came to the fore after Godwin Emefiele, Emmanuel's baby, you know, Trizard attempted to run for office of the president. So I governor running. So that at that time sort of, you know, affected integrity, saying, now if the leader of this institution is also going partisan, so how could we trust? So that was what ordinarily they shouldn't have a reason at all. There should be no question mark, there should be nothing. But I think some elections around that period, materials are not kept at CBN. I think they were taken straight to the INEC offices in the state. Which should not be. Yes, because of the issues. But I think that has died down now. And maybe that's why INEC is returning. And then we're looking at the national election. Not all of the offices are safe. Remember that some of INEC offices in the east have been burnt down. So not all offices are safe to actually take those INEC materials. So that's why we're going back to CBN. And then the dude is himself not running for office of the president again. He's now dealing with us in a different way. That's that for the Punch newspaper this morning.
All right, quickly to the Nation newspaper. The banner headline: Legal giants knock Emefiele for disrespecting Supreme Court. Now the riders, CBN governors, no extension of deadline position raises dust. Apex Bank bars queues at ATM points artificial. Presidency, no action taken yet. All right, now the riders. Okay, the first thing is that legal giants are knocking Emefiele for disrespecting Supreme Court. I've been
suspected. I found it shocking also when he's and you know, for context, he stated this I believe yesterday when he was speaking with I think he was speaking with some diplomats. He was speaking with some members of the international community. So I wonder how those guys will be looking at him. Are you disrespecting? I mean, because they're also aware that there is an order from the highest court in the land. So it's expected that you see these legal giants knocking him and saying, and if you read some of the quotes of Itse Sagi, for instance, respected constitutional lawyer, saying the other parties to the case should now file proceedings for contempt against Emefiele. Maybe that will reduce his zeal and the wickedness and cruelty. And look at what Emefiele himself said. While some of these withdrawal requests are genuine, some are simply reprehensible activities of miscreants. Just to queue up and sell their space for money. I mean, so I don't know. I'm short of words. The exact words to use.
But do you know, the funny thing is, Emefiele is actually, you know, I don't know how to put it now, if I should use the word, you know, the greatest corporate here.
Yeah.
But some governors have paid. I think it was Kogi governor or one other governor. I think Zamfara also. They've been owing. I think they were owing their people 6 months' salary. You've been owing 6 months' salary. You didn't pay, but now you're paying them in cash. Paying government officials in cash, and it's in the old notes. So you look at that.
So I mean, I don't know if that's a confirmed story anyway.
It is.
But that's even by the way. So we're looking at the fact that these has had a reverberating effect on the Nigerian people, the entirety of the Nigerian state, to an extent that some parts of the country, we read it here, are beginning to use CFAs now. You know, the West African French currency. Now, the Supreme Court issued an order going against it. And if you now check his words, he's saying people are queuing for, people are trying to survive. We still hear people going to the bank and staying there all night, staying there too.
Yes, saying that it is artificial is quite insensitive.
Emmanuel did a report last Friday, and you could hear the cries and agonies of people who are frustrated, who are saying this, I mean, this should not be. But it's quite unfortunate. So
it's a dicey situation.
Yeah,
really.
so like Sage said, I do hope that the other parties will file contempt proceedings against Emefiele. Let's just run through the other headlines because of our guests. Yeah.
All right. Tinubu will deliver as president, Buhari tells supporters at Imo rally. That's another campaign promise. Well, just below the nameplate presidential poll, G5 will speak with vote on February 25, says Wike. Ugwanye shuns Atiku to complete aggrieved governor's boycott. Namani, Tinubu has political will to deliver. AAC governorship candidates lash out at Showore, and more on pages 25 and 20 and 28. Yes, and 28 on the Nation newspaper.
Okay, so for context, let's give you, just rush through the headline on the Disney newspaper. President EFG CBN to take position on currency swap after Supreme Court determination today, with the rider Emefiele, politicians buying, storing new banknotes for elections, berate fuel stations over alleged extortion of customers, court diplomatic community on Naira redesign, cashless policy, maintains currency hoarders, abusers will go to jail, governors mopping up new notes, CSOs allege. Interesting days.
Very.
Just above that, Buhari hails Partey on appointment as Gavi CEO, incoming chief executive, pledges to support countries scale up critical routine immunization programs. And these orders headline there, Fitch Nigeria to face post-election economic policy challenges. I'd like us to go through what's also on the Nigerian Tribune before we go. The Nigerian Tribune. Old Naira notes, no need to extend February 10 deadline. Emefiele with the riders, fireworks as Supreme Court entertains FG's objection today. Ogun files application to join Kaduna Zamfara Kogi suit against FG. CBN said to arrest, prosecute defiant POS outlets. Banks in Bayelsa. Ganduje Bello threatened to sanction erring banks. Business owners are building to shut commercial banks, rejecting old Naira notes. Angry protesters besiege Apex Bank in Ondo to change old notes. Distributors threaten to reject newspapers for sale from sales rep in Kwara. I mean, very, very disturbing riders and headlines there, you know, over these old Naira notes. And just below that, 7 killed, 9 houses burnt in Benue, cult clashes. Atiku in Enugu says PDP will form next government, insists a stepping stone to Igbo presidency. Tinubu in Imo promises to continue APC's program. And above the nameplate, no to interim government. Afenifere insist, don't kid up polity. DSS wants politicians. Currency as legal tender. FG and CBN to take stands today. Presidency. Talk about it. Just run through the Daily Trust for us before we go.
Right. The Daily Trust. The headline, no cash yet for elections, INEC. That's another disturbing one. The fact that INEC is coming with no cash. Well, the writers, old notes no longer legal tender, Emefiele. And the Supreme Court hears suit on deadline today. No decision on old notes, presidency. Police take over CBN in Ondo as irate customers lay siege. Daily Trust's podcast ranked best in Nigeria as on page 5. 8 killed in Benue court war. CAJ Bank first to least 10 billion naira Sukuk burned on NGX. Well, the bottom strip of the paper, NEC OK's plan to reduce poor Nigerians to 2.1 million by 2050. 10 days just below the nameplate, 10 days to go. I'm stepping stone to Igbo presidency, Atiku. Tinubu, I'll build on Buhari's legacies. Under my watch, out-of-school syndrome will be reduced in Borno, Jajeri. Just below that as well, Matawali expels NGOs from Zamfara, sacks commissioner. Borno, Kaduna, Oyo, Imo, Rivers, Benue prone to election violence. Policy somersaults responsible for Nigeria's inability to earn satellite. Obasanjo.
All right, so I'm afraid to be able to dwell more on that again, but let's just take this break. I'm sure you've seen the papers. We'll be talking more about the cash crisis shortly when our guest joins us here. We'll be back after this break. Thank you so much for staying with us. You're on to Morning Spring, and it's coming to you live from Western Spring Television, where we say to you, where we bring to you as it is. You can watch us live on StarTimes channel 190, the DTT platform. You can also check us out on all of our social media pages on Instagram, Twitter, and on Facebook, Western Spring Television. You can also watch us live on YouTube and subscribe to our channel. Please do subscribe to our channel at Western Spring Television. We have our guest joining us via Zoom this morning, live on the line from Abuja, the Federal Capital Territory. Mr. Samuel Atiku is an economist and a budget expert. Thank you so much for joining us on Morning Spring this morning, Mr. Samuel Atiku.
Thank you for having me on the program.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, so it's some 10 days to the general elections, the presidential and the National Assembly elections for the first part. But then I'm sure most Nigerians are even more preoccupied, with the challenges of getting cash, the cash crisis that has lingered for about 2 weeks now after that deadline, the initial deadline of the 31st of January. Tell me, what do you make of the entire situation? In your studying of the Nigerian economic system and history, have you had something of this manner before?
Yeah, I mean, what's happening, it's strange in economics. The usefulness of money itself. Money is used for, I would say, 3 things. 1, to actually store value. It's a unit of account to actually take measures. And then more importantly, the most important factor is to become a means of exchange. to actually transact things. Remember, it's because of convenience that money was introduced. Initially, what people typically would do is actually exchange goods. More like that's elementary economics. So money was actually brought in to ease of that system. But when you have it predates, of course. I've looked closely at what has even before us, from the Grecian Empire down to the Roman Empire, and then you look at what happened after that up to where we are now, and we try to look at what economics have done in those periods. Studying the economics of those countries, I've never had in my life, and I've not seen in any academic journals, where government actually begins to use currency as a means, I'll call it. Essentially, what we're seeing in Nigeria is pure politics. It has nothing to do with economics. Economics, it's about the ease of doing things. Remember, if you recall, when this policy was actually brought to bear, I did mention that, yes, they are positive. Government do change currency. When you notice that people are actually stashing up currencies, you could change your currency to drive that and then to make sure that you end illicit fund flows and all those kind of things. But if you look at the central bank has announced that a whole lot of funds has changed hands after that period. But notwithstanding that, where we are now is the fact that we are not even sure one person had been arrested or prosecuted for bringing in huge amount of cash. So the whole essence of getting this done has nothing to do with illicit fund flows, because I've not heard about anybody being prosecuted. So the next phase is now to look at it, okay, are you actually trying to drive a cashless policy? The truth is that the banks, as it were today, do not have enough infrastructure to actually support that kind of initiative. That's one. And there's no concerted effort to even address that issue. If you remember, when the first cashless policy was introduced, they were talked about making sure businesses have POS. They were talked about a whole lot of things, strengthening the infrastructural concept that will support cashless policy. But again, now you will not hear anything about that. So back to where we start from, so that I don't go on and on and on. It's very clear that the governor of the central bank is a politician. It's a card-carrying member of a political party. And given the fact that he is a card-carrying member of a political party, we did warn, as at that time, that for him to have actually said he wants to be the president of Nigeria and declare his intention, that the integrity of that bank itself, the central bank, which is supposed to be sacrosanct, depending on how you want to look at it, the central bank should be seen as independent, will be compromised. Every policy of the central bank will be viewed from the political lens, and that's where we are today. So essentially, it depends on where the central bank playing politics to actually get them off. If you look at the opposition party, they did complain at one point in time that the whole policy was introduced to make sure it scuffles their effort to actually fund their political activity. So no matter where you look at, everything is colored with politics. And I myself, studying economics, I can tell you that I don't understand how you will subject 200 million people to hardship. And when I mean hardship, just think about someone trying to make ends meet, selling orange on the street, trying to make ends meet. The person does not have access to banking systems. He cannot afford to go and buy POS. The only way the person could sell it to goods actually through those exchange, through currency exchange, and then you say, oh, you can't do business. That's exactly what the central bank has done, which again goes to the core of what the role of the central bank should be. So my conclusion here will be simple. I think what is happening is pure politics, and I think it's time for the president, whether he's the one that is actually pushing up the agenda himself, because it's questionable for anybody, any reasonable person to be turning over an economy to allow this to continue. I think it's important for somebody to step in and actually put the hand to this.
All right. What do you make of the Supreme Court orders halt to the deadline and Emefiele's defiance of that order by saying no need to extend February 10 deadline? That is on the Nigerian Tribune this morning. What do you make of that?
That's about, I'm not a lawyer, but typically you have a Supreme Court that typically could tell the president tomorrow that, we've had Supreme Court actually declare people in this country that did not contest the election governors, and they took over the rest. Essentially, Supreme Court can typically tell the president, that's not your seat, and he vacates that seat. And then you have a central bank actually hopefully telling everybody that the Supreme Court has no authority over me. Essentially, that's actually an impeachable offense. Remember, the fine letters of the CBN Act does not give the central bank any authority outside the law of Nigeria. The central bank is not an establishment set out outside the laws of the country. And we know the interpretation of that law is who interprets the law of the country. At the highest level, the Supreme Court. So if the Supreme Court is saying that, definitely you have to obey remember, currency itself, it's an obligation by the government. It's saying that once you hold this currency and it's tendered anywhere, nobody can reject it. So definitely, if you look at the fine letters of the Supreme Court, the CBN Act itself, anyone that rejects the Naira, it's a criminal offense. So what he has done is actually a criminal offense. So I wonder why the Attorney General of the Federation, that should actually be the custodian of the law, had actually not started the process of actually prosecuting the central bank governor. I think it's actually out of place, and I think the legislators need to actually stem in. Because if this continues, then anarchy ensues. We've seen that already. Ogun State government is saying, okay, if you're a bank, you don't obey the Supreme Court, I'm going certainly to shut you down. And we can do that because they're actually law enforcer. So if I'm a governor of my state and the Supreme Court tells me pass a judgment, it's my obligation to actually obey the Supreme Court. So if a bank in my state refuses to collect the currency, definitely I can take action against that bank. So then if you have all those things going on, then anarchy ensues. So my take there is that the central bank maybe has been good advice. He doesn't understand what he's doing. Clearly, we've seen actions that he has taken in the past that had worsened the plight of Nigerians. And without missing word, I think it shows clearly that his understanding of the governing laws of that institution, he has very limited knowledge of that.
All right, so Mr. Atiku, let's look at the argument of the CBN. When these all matters started, the CBN said the Naira redesign policy is to promote financial inclusion and to aid security agencies' efforts in tackling insecurity. I remember Emefiele also then talking about it's going to help to curb vote buying. And so recently, the CBN's spokesperson, Ositan Wasinobi, also at an event said it's not targeted at any group or any persons, but it's saying that it's to make the monetary policy decisions more efficacious. That's quoting him, and that it will also help in fighting inflation, and that if you also notice that the exchange rates have been relatively stable since all of these policies start. So, these arguments by the CBN, do you find them credible enough to continue to push on with this policy?
I think those are just I'll call those actually just letters crumpled on papers. They have absolutely no connection in economics. In fact, the actions of the central bank, so if you go to a community and then you scuffle, you prevent ability, for instance, now I'm to sell something for 50 naira. And then you scuffle my ability to sell that, what do I do next? The next thing I will do is most likely raise price so that at least you can do electronic transfer. Right? And then what we have seen already is that inflation has not come down. If you look closely at the number, remember, inflation rate is just a measure of increase in price. It's not that the price of goods and services is falling. It's just the rate at which it's increasing will drop. So essentially, what the central bank is saying is that if people don't have currency, if people have to queue in banks overnight, it will actually stop people from buying things, and then with that, the price of goods and services will begin to fall. That's habitual. That's actually a very funny policy, making people hungry, and then because you are hungry, you can't buy food. You are extremely hungry. The price of food in the market will begin to drop down. I don't know where that's been done, right? It's not possible. The second statement that you allude to is the fact that it's to actually help financial inclusion. So if you look closely at the commercial bank, the list of commercial banks in Nigeria, and you look at where they are concentrated, they are typically concentrated in the urban regions. Most of the rural communities do not even have access to banks. I mean, you could see, if you go to the city, you see people queuing in banks. If you go to the rural communities where there's no bank, just imagine what they are going through. Are facing in the city centers, in urban regions where you villages. I mean, you could call people in the villages and you see what they are going through. So when you talk about financial inclusion, what is inclusion? Inclusion in English terms means that you're part and parcel of something. So definitely, I think it's actually encouraging exclusion in the social sense. Because number one, the rules around opening banking, if you want to open a bank in Nigeria, is still very complicated. You have to utility bill. The truth is that how many Nigerians have utility? How many people are even connected to the grid system? Whether it's the water or it's the electricity that will now generate utility bill to go out from it. So those rules are still there, hanging in there. It has not been lifted. So that again does not hold waters. So no matter how you try to look at this, it's not that it's to read vote buying. So if you want to actually stop vote buying, and you mention one person that actually been prosecuted. The last, we had a recent election in Osun State. People were caught actually indulging in vote buying, right? Have you seen them being prosecuted publicly? And then you're making an example of them. So the intent is actually not to curb vote. The truth is that politicians, whether you like it or not, have ways of actually getting these funds. They have the funds. So if people think that the upcoming election is the reason, you'll be shocked on the day of the election that those funds will come out. Then, the real issue is that the central bank can't see beyond its nose the policy systems underpinning and how they think, the thinking process around this is actually faulty. And that shows clearly that there's always an ulterior motive for what your actions you're taking. And I think the central bank needs to understand that its mandate is not election management. The mandate of the central bank is not INEC. There's INEC that is supposed to handle elections. The role of the central bank is monetary policy, one, ensuring that the price of goods and services in the country remains stable. Two, ensuring that there's economic growth. It is highlighted in the CBN Act. So if the central bank is walking away from its mandate and taking on the responsibility of the, of INEC, you're taking up the responsibility of the Nigerian police, then just like he has done in the past also, taking up the responsibility of the Ministry of Finance, taking up the responsibility of the Ministry of Agriculture, then definitely you are forming a government itself even within the central bank. And the outcome that we're seeing today is not pleasant at all. Even the richest in society, I can say that people think, it's for the poor are suffering. If you go to the airports, typically in Lagos Airport or Abuja Airport, you typically pay for trolleys, right? To actually move your load. If you go in there, because people don't have cash, they don't have currency. Some people are carrying load on their head. It's there for everybody to see. So the whole system had collapsed. Everything is falling on its head, and then nobody seems to be taking action. And then the central bank is still doubling down and rolling out papers. And those, if you read those things, they're actually very laughable because they have no logic around it. There's no logic around some of these things the more you think about it.
So, what about the parts where it said it's going to help in fighting insecurity also?
Yeah. Policy came in place, right? I did mention that most of the bandits actually do consult. How do I call it? Most of their, those devilish, to use the word lively, actions that they take involve the movement of cash. So most of them are stockpile cash, and definitely changing the currency will force them to take the cash back to the banks. And then with that, you could actually rein in and end something. Yes, that's true. That could be a very good policy action. But the truth is that ever since this policy started, one thing you will notice is that at no point I've seen a situation whereby someone had been caught or somebody had been prosecuted for depositing huge amount of funds. I recall at the initial stage that people were a little bit panicking, especially those that have funds. Some of them were rushing to buy dollars. The central bank did go to some places and raided those places. And then there was this big talk around all those things. Now, Today, we can see images of even bandits banishing the new Naira notes. I don't know whether they are real, whether they are fake, but at no point had we seen a situation whereby the security architecture of Nigeria had been able to clamp down on these people. That's wrong. I mean, that shows clearly that something is fundamentally wrong. Yes, it may have contributed to that, but given the way that the process has been managed, see, in the country, the total currency inflation is just barely maybe about 2 trillion as at that time. If you want to swap 3 trillion, remember the old 3 trillion is not 1,000 naira. We have other lower denomination notes. You have like 15 naira, you have 20 naira, you have 5 naira. So if you know that the bandits are stocking, piling up the 200 naira, the 500 naira, and the 1,000 naira notes, why not print a lot of 100 naira notes and actually ensure that at least the poor society begins to? Because you know what it means to actually take a big cash of, let's assume you want to give somebody 10,000 naira with 100 naira note. The money will be as big as this, and then the logistics involved moving that money becomes even more complicated. And then, but at the end of the day, the poor people on the street will still have 100 naira to do their transaction. But unfortunately, the 100 naira note was not released. The 50 naira note is not in circulation. The 20 naira note is not in circulation. And then even the bigger denomination notes, they are not in circulation. So essentially, the whole policy objective is not well thought out. That's one. Two, the central bank do have electronic means of transfer, making transactions. The architecture around those things has not even been expanded. There's no even talk about expanding it. To make transfers now, sometimes you make transfers, you try to do electronic transfer. The failure rate at the that's the second thing. And there's no concerted effort. You will not see the central bank actually pushing banks to expand those avenues. Absolutely not. So when you put all these things together, you will discover that the primary objective is not security. I made allusion, I was suggesting that it could be, but it's not. It's more political. Let's look at it clearly. If it's security and then people are suffering this way, you will have stepped in to actually begin to ease off the pressure people are facing. But rather, if you turn and then you look closely at where the central bank is pushing itself, and then the whole conversation that you see going on, you will notice that then the governors themselves also pushing up and doing all those kind of things. The National Assembly doing its own. You will know that the whole conversation revolves around the political conversation, the political consideration, which is very wrong because, again, politics is just going to happen in 1 month. We elect whoever we want to elect. People will move on. But the impact, the economic impact of our actions, remember, the impact of 2016 recession, people are still suffering it today. People that lost jobs during that period, some of them have not been able to recover their jobs. People lost assets during that period, they've not been able to recover. 2016, how many years ago? Then COVID happened also. Many people suffered consequences. Farmers suffered consequences. They lost their wares. They are just trying to come out of that problem. And then you come up with these people cannot even make trade again. So you're putting more pressure on people. And then the impact of that could be devastating. And that's why crime rate had gone up in Nigeria. The poverty rate had gone up, multidimensional poverty, 133 million people. I mean, you worsen the situation that people, you should be solving problems, not actually making life miserable for people. I think that's the essence of government. Government as an institution, just to say the essence of government is that you institute government to do 3 things: to give liberty, right? Make sure people can walk freely, ensure that there's life, people can live, and then there's a pursuit of happiness. People can aspire in their society. When you take away life, you take away security, there's no security, everybody's panicking. People can, there's no pursuit of happiness in the society, then why do you have government itself? So the way I look at this thing, if you look closely at the politics of this decision making, no matter how you try to analyze, any top economics will tell you that this points straight to political consideration, which the central bank should not be indulging in.
All right, Mr. Atiku, it's about 10 days to the elections, the general elections, and the INEC has said no cash yet for elections. And the Supreme Court has ordered that the deadline, should be stopped and should be extended. And Emefiele is saying that there is no need for a deadline. How do you see this confusion being stemmed before the elections in 10 days?
elections will always come and go. That's the reality of ground. Election is an event in a long political circle. And to do elections, whether we like it or not, there are money involved. For instance, aside from the vote buying, the bad part of it, you need funds to actually mobilize agents to the polling units. You need funds to do a whole lot of things, monitoring. You need funds to keep the generator running, especially if you have a situation room. Of course, I'm sure the television station needs funds to actually keep things running. So. That's important. The second thing also is that going into election, you want to be sure that there's no heightened tension. We don't want people going to the pool and then they're hungry, right?
Oh, okay. So it appears that the network, there's some issues there, but we'll try and reconnect to Mr. Samuel Atiku, helping us to, have a deeper understanding of the dynamics of what is happening in our country at this moment. Very disturbing trend of events. You heard in Akure how citizens, marched to the central bank. Yes. It's that appalling. Citizens, because the banks aren't collecting the notes again, so the citizens had to go to the central bank. And the Emefiele is still insisting that nothing will be done, but we expect to have some clearer picture today. And maybe a decision will be taken by the central bank and also by the federal government on what to do and how to go ahead. But it's also disappointing that an order given by the Supreme Court was not acted upon at all. It wasn't acted upon at all. But we do hope. Because if you check what the papers were reporting this morning, very disturbing trend of events.
The CBN governor has said emphatically that old notes are no longer legal tender.
They are no. Okay, so we have Mr. Samuel Atiku back with us here now. Let's bring him on. I hope we have a clearer line and network now. Mr. Samuel Atiku, thank you so much for joining us again.
Yeah, thank you. Apologies about that.
Okay.
It's one of those things we also need money for to actually strengthen our ID.
Okay, so you can conclude, you can, land on your line of thought.
Yeah, so what I'm saying is that you need money to actually run the election. So you want money to actually flow so that we could run that. I think that's one. Number two, also, it's important for us to see the Supreme Court, regardless of whether the judgment of the Supreme Court favors us or not. We're a country that abide by rules of law. So we want to actually set a precedent that, the fine words of the Supreme Court is what we obey, even if we disagree with that. That's how countries are built, right? It's not based on everybody taking their own action and moving in some different trajectory. So my take here would be that, yes, I will say that the central bank, regardless of whether the governor of the central bank refuses, you have 6 deputy governors within the central bank. I think they need to take action. You have the board of the central bank that's an oversight body over that central bank. They need to take action and move us forward from this court mine.
Okay, so, I should ask you to help us walk us through the impact, because the CBN seems to be the only one talking about the positives and the potential benefits of this policy. Most every other person is talking about the negative impact and what have you. Only a few persons have supported the CBN, especially since things went down south. So help us analyze the impact of this. And you made reference to it, saying that it even has affect the elite also, saying at the airport, those who should pay for trolley have had to carry their loads on their head. That's for those who belong to the upper class. But help us look at the impact. So we are midway through Q1 of 2023. What are the kind of impact we are looking at here on the ordinary Nigerian on the streets of Osogbo, the middle class, and even the elite and the Nigerian economy at large?
Yeah, I think the first thing is to understand that money is just paper printed by government and then carries the authority of government, that once you actually give someone this, it gives you goods, and then on and on. So money is built on goodwill and faith of the government. I think it's always important to, but just imagine the US government printing money and giving it to you. If you go anywhere in the world, you spend that money, they give you goods. So money is for exchange, and it's what drives the economy. So when you clough up the economy, almost 65% of economic activity in Nigeria happens informally. So when you look at Nigeria, Nigeria is the biggest economy in Africa. About 65% of what is happening happens informally in the market. People doing transactions with cash. So because they are struggling to do transactions with cash, if you go to the market and you talk to them, you will discover that the volume of trade they are making is down. And when it means essentially, just imagine a farmer producing egg, and then the egg have a life cycle. Maybe after 2 weeks, the egg gets damaged. So you have to sell it within that. And then you give it to a market woman. The market woman is the one that transacts that. But because there's no currency to buy it, the egg is left there, it gets damaged. So the market woman had lost her working capital. Then also she turns to the farmer and tells the farmer, I don't want more egg. Then the farmer is also losing. And because of that, also the farmer says, okay, let me reduce some of my chickens, right? That is laying this egg so that they don't continue to eat my food. And then you kill some chicken, you try to sell that off, you're struggling with that. Then the person selling feed also to those chicken also have to go. So it's a domino effect that affects everything. And that's what leads to things like recession. So already in the first quarter of this year, we have seen that the economy is going to contract. The size of the economy is going to contract. Essentially, well, you need to contract for 2 consecutive quarters for you to say there's recession. Ideally, in an election year, the economy used to slow down. But what we're seeing the first quarter of this year, because of no transaction, the economy is going to most likely contract. And if this is not corrected going into the next quarter, we'll be talking about another round of recession. That will be the first time, I think, in the history of human beings that a president will superintend over about three recession in a go. I think that's important to mention that. The second big issue is also to understand that the goodwill of government is what drives currency. So essentially, if people lose faith in the currency of the country, people will resort to using other currency. And if you pick up the news, you will see people using SEPA already, people using dollar for transaction. That's the dollarization. It has happened in the world. If you go to Zimbabwe, it happened. People will classically demand, I don't want naira, I want to be paid dollars. In Nigeria today, some workers are already demanding that. Some businesses are demanding that, meaning that they've lost complete faith in the naira. Faith in the naira, everything begins to fall apart. So that's the second big challenge. And then I can talk about inflation also, their inflationary tendency. For people that cannot do transfers, they tend to, or maybe things that you would typically sell maybe for 500, sometimes you may have to raise the price up so that you can at least encourage people to do transfer into your account. So for instance, now you want to buy orange before, orange of maybe 200 naira. But you can't be doing transfer of 200. You may have to upscale it to 500. And so a whole lot of things will begin to shift. So instead of you buying orange, you may just defy it altogether. And what that leads to is a reduction in consumer spending. So just for context, there are 3 people that spend in an economy. The consumer, that's me and you in the economy. The second one is the government, they spend. And then the third one is the private sector. In Nigeria, consumer spending happens to be the biggest bulk of spending. Just for context, the Nigerian government is very small. Spending in Nigeria comes from government. The private sector, because there's no investment in Nigeria, that's why we always shout, you need to attract investment, you need to attract investment. The private sector is also not spending enough because, again, they don't have access to debt, they can't borrow money and all those factors. So that's also very small. The biggest spending component is the consumer. So if you reduce consumer spending, it means businesses are not making enough sales, meaning that their profitability level goes down. If their profit goes down, definitely they have to lay off workers. Short-term events, January till now, if they correct it on time, we may not enter it. But if it extends for a longer period, you begin to see. In essence, it's bad for the economy in terms of impact. Why the objective may be positive in terms of political. That's if politicians have not acquired the money already, because I'm sure they must have. And then maybe fighting insecurity. But always remember that at the heart of every economic decision making is the people that should take precedence. You cannot begin to kill, you cannot because there's a fly on a tiles, you now use a sledgehammer to destroy everything. No, that's not how it works. You have to look for something more subtle to kill the flies and leave the tiles actually on the floor. So I think that's what the central bank is. It's essentially the central bank is using a bulldozer to kill a fly and then destroying the whole house with it.
All right. So I feel that a lot depends on what happens at the Supreme Court today. For the Supreme Court's hearing a substantive suit, and a number of other states have also joined in now. But do you think that the cash withdrawal limit policy that was earlier introduced, late last year, even before this Naira redesign, do you think it complicated the matter in any way? Perhaps that's what has led to the complication of this crisis, and that has made it worse.
Yeah, 20,000 naira. I did complain then also that 20,000 naira is very, very limited in terms of what you can 20,000 naira. 20,000 naira, I mean, it's not the same 20,000 naira. So my take here is that maybe it's a contributing factor, but I don't think much in terms of that. I think the problem we have is that the central bank, number one, did not print enough funds, and then they did not hand those funds to the banks. And when they hand it over to the banks also, the process for distributing the funds not well spelled out. So it's more of a logistic problem. I think it's more of a logistic, not necessarily the policy problem. 20,000 naira, taking that from the counter. So it's how will I put this now? I cannot speculate as an economist. You don't speculate until you have concrete evidence, but it may be a contributing factor. But for now, I can't say I have evidence that, yes, it has led to the scarcity of cash. Because if 2 million people are to a bank today and then they withdraw 20,000 naira, we won't have these problems. The currency will one way or the other begin to flow. Even people begin to hold those currencies within themselves, even they know. So rather than, if I know I have to do a transaction of 50,000, I have 20,000, I can send my child to go and collect his own 20,000. There's a way around all these things, but I think it's something that we need to investigate. Maybe a contributing factor, it may be, but the truth is that I don't have evidence that it is for now. Because it's not the first time we have this kind of policies around limiting cash. The second call, so if you look at the numbers closely, very, very few people withdraw more than 10,000, 20,000 from ATMs anyway. Very, very few people. If you look at the transaction numbers, at least from 2019 up to 2021, most people are on average, every Nigerian withdraw about 3,000 to 5,000 naira. So I don't think for the majority of the people it's a problem. But it may be a contributing factor in the sense that because of the pressure, you want to quickly get dollar money out, and then understanding that people also use POS providers. So for a POS providers, how do they withdraw funds and all those things? So it will take a lot of investigation to observe around that. All
right. So, I mean, assuming that these policies, and we've talked about the fact that there seems to be a political undertone to this policy, but so now looking at this assumption, you are an economist, so you say you don't do with speculation, but look at this scenario. So assuming that this policy was done with the noblest of intentions, do you feel that the approach of the CBN was faulty ab initio? I'm asking these questions because in the past 2 weeks, I've spoken to a number of other stakeholders within the sector. I've spoken to the chairman of the POS operators here in Osun State. I've spoken to the spokesman, to the president of corporate affairs managers of banks who spoke on behalf of Nigerian banks. And one thing I got to know was that the POS chairman said they were not factored into this policy at all until 2 days to the end of the first deadline of 31st. The banks have said that the amount withdrawn from them was not the same that they got back. I also got to know that microfinance banks are not even in the picture at all. You made reference to the fact earlier on that most of our banks are concentrated in urban areas, and most times we even think it's the northern part of the country that is most affected. Here in Osun State, Osun Central Senatorial Districts, where the state capital is, only Oshogbo, the state capital, has a functional bank. All of the other major towns, including the rural areas, have no banks. So most people from that senatorial district, 10 local governments, have to come down to Oshogbo, the state capital, to do banking transactions. So looking at that explanation, looking at the fact that POS operators were not factored into it, until 2 days to the end when they saw that there was a crisis. Microfinance banks, the last time I checked, were not, maybe they were just introduced into it last week or this week. Do you think that approach, even if it was done with the noblest of intentions, was faulty from the word go?
So, yeah, I mean, I did mention that the thinking behind this policy is political. In the initial stage, I thought, no, maybe ABC Central Bank may be thinking about this. I mean, recently, India tried to actually reduce the volume of cash in their society. And there were steps that were taken. One, they ensured that virtually everyone, for instance, things like your voter card, the process of actually getting payment card, debit cards, were simplified to the point whereby, and then there were massive businesses were even given free POS. So once you have a small business that is registered and your transaction is not to a particular degree, they did give them some POS. In fact, your phone, you could easily plug a little, how will I call it now, a little payment club at the back of the phone and use it for financial transactions. So that was rolled out aggressively. And then the whole objective was to reduce the volume of cash in transaction. And the goal was, they had a pro-objective to actually reduce the illicit flow of funds within India. So if the central bank was actually looking to reduce the volume of cash that we have in Nigeria, that would have been their approach, because you could easily look at India that have implemented this not long ago, 2-3 years ago. And then, of course, there were still pressure, but they were able to ride through it. But that was not the case. So just like you said, I reiterate that this is political. The central bank is playing politics. Let's use the word business. The objective is not to make the country cashless. The objective, that's just the added to it. The objective was actually to play politics with this and maybe do some political thing. You will see that immediately after the election, they will most likely drop all the restrictions and everything will go back to normal.
Okay, so, you're talking about the amount of cash in circulation. Is anything wrong with having 2 trillion, 3 trillion naira in circulation? Because so evidently from what has happened, CBN withdrew the money in circulation, maybe like 3 trillion, and then you replace it with maybe 500 billion. I don't know what the figures actually are, but that seems to be what has happened, and that seems to have contributed a lot to this crisis. What's the international, if there is any, a standard? I mean, what's the international average? So for a country, like what's the amount of circulation you can have? What's the percentage of your cash that can be in circulation? Is our own too much at like that 3 trillion with what we have? What's the international average?
So there's no average. It depends on the peculiarity of your country. But looking closely at it, Nigeria is not a heavy cash society. If you compare to the UK, for instance, the UK has more cash. They have cash to GDP ratio. Currency in circulation to GDP ratio is way higher than what you have in Nigeria. But majority the UK is formal. Almost 99% of economic activities that are legitimate in the UK is formal. In Nigeria, schools, if you look at Moshogo and just look at schools, even schools, most of the schools that you have there are informal. In fact, if you come to Oshogo and you look closely at the business environment, you will notice that most businesses in Oshogo, for instance, are informal in nature. That's how complex Nigerian society is. And most of them do not do transactions. Most of the transactions are consummated with cash. So in that kind of society, and that explains why if you look closely at the Nigerian currency, you will see that it gets damaged, mutilated very fast, because the speed at which currency moves from hand to hand in Nigeria is very fast. Because the economy is purely informal. So the dynamism of that is something that you have to consider before you pull out a policy. If you want to drive the country towards formalization, then there's a bigger policy around that, encouraging businesses to register. At the point in time, I think before COVID, the government was trying to do that, simplify the whole registration process. In fact, so if you want to do that, you push the agenda. But clearly, as we have it today, I think that's not the case. In fact, just for context, The M2, the broad money in Nigeria is barely even up to, it's not even up to 40% of our GDP. In contrast, if you look at the US, the total money in circulation is almost 100% of their GDP. So Nigeria's money relative to the size of our economy is not that significant. That explains why we are struggling with credit. If you want to buy things, you have to buy it with hand. You are not using credit. So meaning that credit is not flowing as it should flow. So I don't think that's much of the problem. Again, I reiterate that this is more political than economics.
Well, so, since this started, bank officials, when I spoke to that, the president of the Corporate Affairs Managers of Banks encouraged Nigerians to make use of alternative channels. The CBN has also harped on that again and again. But we've also seen what has now become of those alternative channels. A couple of banks, have been practically shut down online in the last few weeks. People have been, through a lot, trying to transfer, trying to use the platforms of those banks. What is it with it? Is it the pressure of people migrating because they are not able to use cash? Is that what you would say made them to buckle under the pressure? Or is it just coincidental? Is it that the infrastructure is not good enough to carry the weight?
Yeah, I know people always pride Nigeria's interbank systems as one of the best in the world. T1, T2, they talk about all those things. But the truth is that it's not robust enough. And then alternative that we were trying to do, remember the fintechs and all those things, the central bank did not necessarily allow them. The mobile money concept that was about to come, there were regulatory pressure on them. It's only of recent that one of the telecoms company was given license. I don't want to mention this is a TV program, right? It's only recently that they started dropping, some of those blockades that they put in place. We all know what happened to most of the fintech people that were taking over microfinance bank and trying to actually scale up infrastructure. They clamped down there. So in terms of the regulatory environment around expanding payment system in Nigeria, it's not been favorable. So if you are interested in doing that kind of business, the atmosphere, the regulatory environment is not favorable. That's one. Two, in terms of the infrastructure itself, again, not there itself. Majority of Nigerians still do not enjoy broadband services. And that's why sometimes you go to a classical automated teller machine and then you slot in your card, it's out of service, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. Again, that's not there. And again, you know that most of the debit card we use, that's what we use for transactions. That's, again, there are weaknesses there. The third bit is also the massive brain drain that we're experiencing. If you go to the Nigerian banks, most of the IT people that were in charge of building some of this infrastructure that we don't string together codes and the networks, that's what makes up this payment system. Most of them had left the country because of hardship, of economic hardship, and then people looking for better means of livelihood for their families. So majority of them have left. In fact, if you go to some of the banks, it's just empty. In fact, to a point that the banks are now contacting their whole staff that have left and trying to actually more like give them, how will I call it now? Give them incentive to work remotely from abroad, maybe even on a part-time basis, just to maintain systems. So we have a system shut down because, again, the capacity to do that thing is also down. And then more importantly also, I think we do not have a robust plan to actually have a very solid, how will I call it, infrastructure base for our payment system. We've stalled those, the policy had been stalled. Remember, we have the FSS policy 2020 that was introduced when NIT was introduced. And if we read the fine letters of those policy, those plans, certain things should have happened by now, but those things have not happened. I don't want to go into detail because they are very technical. But just to say that the plan that we laid out, the Agenda 2020, remember this 2020, everything 2020, they also failed on its head, they fall on its head, and it was not implemented. So a combination of all these actions are happening simultaneously with this, and that explains why, aside from using your debit card for transaction, what other alternative do you have? It's either you use the USSD, and you know that's also came under regulatory pressure. There were contexts and all. If you remember, a few years ago, there were front and back around that regulatory issues around how you do transactions. So a lot of fight happened between one of the telecom provider and the banks, and even that space is still not clear. If you leave that one, so I can go on and on. Coordination of the payment system has been a disaster in the last 4 years. I mean, just to say that clearly.
All right, so essentially we can then conclude that Nigeria is not ready for a cashless society, because if you look at this same policy in other African countries, for instance, in Kenya, from my own layman reading of the situation there, it seems to be a success. You look at the M-Pesa in Kenya, the ordinary Kenyan, uses the USSD code, or their non-even internet-enabled phones to carry out financial transactions. So if that is happening on the African continent, another country, and Africa, Nigeria is said to be the giant of Africa. So why are we not ready? Why does it seem like we are not ready for a cashless society or move in that direction of cashless?
Everybody, you don't put the business, how would I put it now? Let me use this word so that I don't use the word again on TV. The challenge is that we look at regulation in Nigeria in a reactive way. We don't look at innovation. Nigeria is always cloughing innovation. We stop innovation from happening in protecting existing business. Innovation strengthens business, not cloth their neck. So when the mobile payment system was coming, Africa, we were all adapting the GSM platform and all those things. And people were coming. Rather than the central bank embrace it and encourage, of course, it means that younger people will become richer. And then that means that power may shift, right? From the elite that we have now, we shift it into the hands of young people. But rather than the central bank allow those innovation happen, I think they came up with funny, retrospective, I'll call it regulation to stop people from doing that. In fact, you need a license to have a payment system. And if you want to have a payment system, you see that the licensing requirements, you go on the website of the CBN, you see the long list of things you have to do. It's as if you're setting up a bank. It's as difficult as that. I don't think it should be as difficult as that, especially for making, just like you said, with ordinary QR codes, papers, you could make transactions as fast as possible. But unfortunately, again, that's not happening. Then the second bit of it is also the trust system. If you go to a bank, for instance, you are holding an ATM and suddenly your money grows and disappears. The question is that who is responsible? Typically, they try to push it on you, but that's not how it should work. You have gone to a bank, you've given the bank your money, the bank is safeguarding it. What you are holding is only an access key. So if someone steals your key, breaks into a bank vault and steals your money, the question is that who is responsible? Who should be responsible for refunding the money? It's the bank, because regardless of the fact that right? And enter into the vault, the bank should actually provide safeguarding principle. That's why in countries that this adoption had gone far, from the US even up to Kenya, if your money grows and disappears from your bank, the bank will be responsible for refunding the money. And that encourages you to actually go again. So when you see people not using this means of exchange, it all stems from lack of trust in the system, which is actually a creation of the central bank itself. So my take here is that, again, regulatory environment does not encourage innovation in Nigeria. I think we said that. I can't overflow that. The second thing is that, again, is that the central bank itself had not done enough to actually gain the trust of Nigerians. And because of that, we are experiencing what we are experiencing. But
so what about the informal nature of our society? You just made reference to that earlier in our conversation, the fact that, most of our society is largely informal. How does that work with a cashless, within a cashless society framework?
Yes, I think it's workable. The first thing is that why is the society informal? I think, again, that's a big cost of government. We allow certain things to go. For instance, transportation in Osogbo. If I want to jump on a taxi in Osogbo, how do I pay? I have to pay cash, right? Now, if you encourage innovation, Atiku would actually come up with a brainwave. I call some young people, so let's sit together, let's write something. Okay, in the front of the box, we just QR code. We have a small screen that we put in front of the driver. The moment you come in, you just use your phone to touch that QR code. The driver see that the money is there, and the driver is 100% sure that the money is there. Because if the money is not there and it gets to the bank, I will have to pay the driver for that failed transaction. Then the driver have nothing to lose. Then everybody find it more convenient to do that, despite the fact that it's informal business as possible. That's what happened in Kenya. That's what is happening in Tanzania. If you go to China also, of course, people look at China as, if you go to the nitty-gritty of China, right, it's not different from Nigeria. Anyhow, you see people actually putting small QR code on printed paper. They don't even have computer. They just put it on a small wood and put it near their shop. The moment you do it, they get alert immediately. You don't need to type anything. Just do like this. So even an elderly person can walk in there and do that, and then transaction goes in. So the fact that businesses are operating informally in Nigeria is a creation of government itself. And it also hinders government's ability to mobilize domestic revenue. Because if you have encouraged innovation and things like that are happening in Osogbo, regardless of the fact that it may not be happening across Nigeria, once it's happening in Osogbo itself, then it spreads to Oyo State, Ibadan, then it begins to spread across. That's how innovation happens, always in a tiny, small, I'll call it town, or a tiny village. And then once it works in there, it starts expanding, and you begin to create jobs with that. And then that's what gave back to most of this business. In fact, from Facebook that we talk about, it's just a small community of people, and then it has gone global. So that's our innovation. But in Nigeria, we want innovation to be global and then narrow it down. So it doesn't work like that. So my take is that informal transaction, a market woman, I'm buying pepper from a market woman. I go in there, I go to my mama. If you put this small paper in front of this, somebody come here and then tap it on it, you receive a lot on your phone. I give her a small, tiny phone. And somebody does that, and she goes to the bank and she gets her money. The point is that it may be difficult at first, but after 2-3 weeks, everybody gets used to it. Everybody in the market starts using the same transaction. And before you know it, you eliminate the concept of even using cash altogether. That's how I'll call it innovation actually spread. I'm just giving that as a simplistic idea. So the same thing, paying school fees, paying rent, paying all those things. We can go on and on and on. All those things happen informally in Nigeria. And there's a need to, and the reason why it's happening and innovation is not setting in again is because of regulatory environment. It's not favorable at all. It doesn't encourage innovation whatsoever.
Okay, so as we reach home stretch, just before we let you go, so it's election year. Election is 10 days from now. There's some economic issues that always happen around the election. Maybe you mind just telling our listeners, our viewers, let us have an understanding of what to expect. So it seems that every election year there is more money in circulation as against what is happening now. And then maybe after the election, some harsh decisions will need to be taken. I think we've seen that a couple of election cycles also. Is there going to be any difference here? For instance, the subsidy question will need to be addressed. Would that be after the election, or would that be when the new government is sworn in? And then what kind of economy should we expect after the election? There are concerns about maybe there will be post-election violence or not. Many of these issues. What's your reading of the Nigerian economic situation before, during, and after the 2023 general elections?
Yeah, before the election, we did warn then that regardless of the budget, that the subsidy was not going to be dropped. Of course, if you look at the budget, they were saying they would drop it. I said it's not possible because of the elections. And so what we'll most likely see immediately after the election is that subsidy will be dropped. And if subsidy is dropped, of course, the cost implication will hit the economy. In terms of inflation will typically pick up. And people say, what has subsidy has to do with inflation? There are a lot of things, logistics in Nigeria. A PMS actually drive the logistical cost. Regardless, we've seen direct connection between the two. So definitely the price of goods and services will go up in the country. And that means that people will be more pained, right? People will struggle more in terms of that. I don't want to be a bad prophet, but that said itself, the heightened environment that we presently experience, I think all those things will ease off. All this cash staff